Today I want to talk about ketamine assisted psychotherapy available in Australia. So ketamine has been long used as a very safe anaesthetic for decades. And a while ago it was discovered that in smaller doses, ketamine could alleviate treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. So at lower doses, ketamine has a different effect on the brain. Ketamine works on the NMDA receptors, part of the glutamate signaling circuitry in the brain, and several other pathways and microcircuits in the brain. And overseas, it has also been used and researched for mental health issues. In Australia, it is available for long-term treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. So you would need to be able to access a psychiatrist and qualify for the medicine. And I must caution you that at the moment, ketamine in these use cases is not Medicare rebated. So unless you have a spare few $1,000s for the initial 4-week course, then I'm sorry that you might be disappointed. If you are interested to learn more about ketamine assisted psychotherapy, please watch on. So ketamine used as an anaesthetic will be in high doses that has a completely different effect on your brain, as does the long-term use of ketamine in party and recreational situations. In fact, a word of caution to people that do use ketamine recreationally, regularly, is that it can exhaust the neurotransmission in the brain and lead to the opposite effects as we would be hoping for and talking about soon in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So overseas, ketamine has been used for mental health conditions, PTSD, war veterans, eating disorders, and trauma. Ketamine is also contraindicated for people that have got active psychosis and unmanaged blood pressure. It's usually administered intravenously in a clinic. There was a nasal spray developed, but in this video, I'll be talking about the at-home use of oral ketamine delivered in a troche form. This would be taken 2 or 3 times a week, initially for a period of 4 weeks, because ketamine is not a one-hit wonder, and it is ideally dovetailed with psychotherapy. While people may have some dissociative or visual or sensory effects while they're under the effects of ketamine, it's less likely to be wild visual distortions and hallucinations in the trippy sense of the word. So what does ketamine do? Well, ketamine works on several different neurochemicals in the brain, microcircuits in the brain, and alters the signaling of certain primary neurotransmitters that are also found to be involved in the maintenance of treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. And this kind of creates a bit of a reset button in the brain. It's interesting that a lot of antidepressant medication is aimed at the serotonin network, whereas serotonin receptors and transmission is a very small proportion of the brain. About 90% of the brain is running on glutamate. So it's really significant that this is what ketamine is affecting. This has a downstream effect to the microglia, to immune cells, to inflammatory agents, and to loosening up the rigidity of cells in the brain that may have been overexcited. Our brain at rest, the thoughts that circulate around our mind, are known as the default mode network. They're basically the recursive thoughts, usually about self or self in relation to other, that go around our head when we're at rest. For somebody who is depressed or has PTSD, these thoughts can be ruminations and rigid, meaning they get stuck in a loop in this default mode network. The thoughts about self and other can be highly negative, repetitive, and there doesn't seem to be any way out. What ketamine does is it disrupts the default mode network. What this then does is allows a window of time where the default mode network is kind of down. This allows other neurochemicals to work. There are a certain proportion of people that don't respond to ketamine, and of course ketamine used over time and coupled with psychotherapy is far more likely to result in lasting changes than short-term use of ketamine, because unfortunately what the research shows is that the effects do wear off over time. Now I liken this to the well-worn tracks that we always walk. Now if you're always going in one direction on one route, say you always drive in this particular route or walk in this particular route to work, and you decide that you want to go a different way, the going a different way is going to require a lot of attentional energy from you to divert what would normally be an habitual way of just walking or driving without paying too much attention. Now, walking that different way might take more energy, it might be longer, and eventually you may just decide it's easier for you to walk the normal way. And this is what will happen in the brain. While the ketamine might disrupt the neurochemicals and create a great window for change, this can revert. This is why psychotherapy is encouraged, and this is why often repeated doses of ketamine are necessary. So when ketamine is psychoactive, it's affecting primarily the glutamate pathways in the brain, but also the dopamine, the noradrenaline, the anti-inflammatory pathways, levels of BDNF, and this is creating conditions for memory reconsolidation, that is the activation of memories that might come up, and their change and transformation. It's also creating conditions where the default mode network's contents can also be altered. So while ketamine's active for the 1 hour, usually out of the system after 2 hours, the effects on the brain of the ketamine continue days afterwards. And it's in this window, this critical opening window, where the changes can occur. So this means that the actual journey and experience of the ketamine, while it can be very valuable, isn't absolutely essential to the working of ketamine. What is important is that you are capitalizing on the neuroplastic changes in the windows of opening of the critical brain changes soon after the ketamine doses and capitalizing on those. This is called neuroplasticity. The experiences during the ketamine dose can vary greatly. You do not need to have a huge hit and fall into the K-hole of ketamine to have any valid experience and the neuro changes that were mentioned. However, the use of ketamine psychotherapeutically does require attention to the set and setting. Set and setting are terms commonly used in psychedelic-assisted therapy. And what this means is that what is the intention that you're setting? What is it that you are wanting to gain from the use of ketamine and even from the particular time when you are under the influence of ketamine? The setting is the environment and the conditions under which you will be taking the ketamine. As mentioned, taking ketamine recreationally is completely different. People are usually at a party, they are taking alcohol, and there's a lot of distraction around. It's a very different experience to therapeutically dose with ketamine in an environment where you are supported to allow the veil between your consciousness and your unconscious to thin. Now, sometimes this might release awarenesses and insights into your conscious mind that were otherwise unavailable due to the constant chatter or the rigidity of your brain and your psychology under your normal conditions. Utilizing psychotherapy alongside ketamine use is important. One, if you're suffering from PTSD and you do have some material released into your consciousness under the effects of ketamine, it may not feel as challenging, but of course this is being volunteered and surrendered for processing. So organising a psychology or a counselling session close in time to the use of the ketamine will help process anything that's been brought up. Some people have some interesting thoughts, feelings, perceptions while they're on the ketamine. And given that ketamine's got an effect on so many different neurotransmitters and circuitries in the brain, and this effect endures for days after the ketamine, it is then that you want to learn to walk in that different route as a natural way of being. And so basically, dovetailing the ketamine assisted therapy with psychotherapy is going to help you integrate the experiences that you may have had under the influence of ketamine, but also capitalize on the neuroplastic changes in the critical window that's been opened by the ketamine and the neurological changes that are happening then, to establish them as a regular way of being over time. Using ketamine at home provides a safe space for you, but there are ways that you can set up your environment. Perhaps you've got music that you'd like to play, organize your intention, and prepare for the session. Many people recommend taking a pen and paper, or I would say you could also voice record your experience soon afterwards so you can capture any insights, awarenesses, or anything that happened within the experience and be able to look over them afterwards or take them to therapy to further integrate them. You never know, something may pop up that's really, really valuable to you because it's allowing a window of change to open in your mind, and it's also thinning out that veil that the default mode network uses to oppress you, your thoughts in your own mind, to allow different ways of thinking about yourself, your life, and where you belong in the world and your connection with others. So I hope this has given you a general understanding of the use of ketamine assisted psychotherapy in Australia.